Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino, the novelization of his 2019 film of the same name. So, I was really curious to read this book because I'm a pretty big fan of Quentin Tarantino's films. I think he is a director who pretty much always delivers. I won't say I've loved every film that he's made. Actually, I didn't even love the film that this book is novelizing, but I've enjoyed the vast majority of his body of work. I thought Reservoir Dogs was really boring. I just couldn't really get into that movie. Pulp Fiction is an undisputed classic. I actually never watched Jackie Brown, so I can't comment on that one. But the Kill Bill movies are so fun and ridiculous. Death Proof is watchable. Inglorious Bastards is awesome. Django Unchained is just something else. And The Hateful Eight, that one actually might be my favorite of his films. I know that one's kind of the black sheep of his filmography because a lot of people thought that one was weaker than what he normally does, but I disagreed. I thought The Hateful Eight was a really great movie, and I think that one may be my favorite. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the film slash book in question, that one took me a while to really appreciate. When I first watched it, I didn't really like it that much, and like I said, I still don't love it. I think it's so wildly self-indulgent. There are so many shots that just never end of driving around that's just meant to indulge in period music. You could have cut out a half hour of that movie at least and not lost anything. So I think it has some issues for me, and I think the second half of that movie isn't quite as gripping as the first half. But the ending made up for it. That was pure Tarantino grisly magic, and I love that. So overall, I really do like the film, just not quite as much as some of his others. But um, when he announced that he was going to be novelizing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a year or so after it was already released, I was intrigued because I wanted to see whether Tarantino could actually write prose. I mean, we all know that Quentin Tarantino can write dialogue. That is what his films are known for, is the dialogue. The scene in Pulp Fiction at the beginning, um, where the look at the big brain on Brad and say what one more time, I dare you. That scene is some of the best dialogue I think that's ever been written for a film. So I knew that he could write dialogue, but I wanted to see whether he could handle himself writing narration and description. Um, and the answer is mostly yes. This book was far from perfect. However, it was also a whole lot more than I was anticipating it being. So, right up front, it's important to note that even though this is technically a novelization of a film, the story does not actually adhere 100% or even mostly to what is depicted in the film. Um, I think this book consists mainly of scenes that didn't make it into the movie, which was already bloated as hell, that Tarantino just wanted to use so he could get some use out of the material that he had created. So this book, it covers this, I mean, it has the same trajectory basically of the film, but a lot of the stuff in here does not happen in the movie. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Although I do want to say this, the ending to the film was, I think, the real saving grace of that movie, the real redeeming factor. And the way that the book ends is not the way that the movie ends. Actually, the movie's ending is glossed over about 100 pages into this book. It's just briefly summarized, and that's it. And I thought that was a bit of a detriment because I think the ending to the movie made everything feel like it was building up to something. The way that it kind of does that switcheroo, even though I think it was kind of just a repeat of what he had already done with Inglorious Bastards, where you think it's something that's historically authentic, and then it's like, oh, it's really not. That ending still made the film for me because it made everything feel like it was building to something. And the book kind of lacks that because the ending to the movie is just touched upon and then that's it. Um, So there is that. That was kind of a knock against it. But in terms of the writing of this book, uh, it was not great, but then again, it was not designed to be great. The prose that Tarantino employs in this book is it's kind of like an Elmore Leonard, except without the originality of Elmore Leonard. It's really simplistic. It's really punchy. It's a whole hell of a lot of telling and not much showing. But somehow he makes that work. I mean, the way it's written is kind of it's on par almost with like a 10th graders what I did over summer vacation English class essay, but it somehow works. It does. It's very obvious that he was not trying to make this some grand literary accomplishment. He's just trying to tell this story and tell it in a somewhat artless but yet effective manner. And I think it mostly succeeded. The prose is, again, it's not going to blow you away, but it kind of suited the story, and it kind of suited Tarantino. I think, like if prior to this I had no idea what Tarantino's writing would be like if he wrote a book, but now having read it, I can firmly say this this is probably what I should have expected, but it works. But the story of the film and this book, as I said, they do differ. But if you haven't seen the film, the story follows the character of Rick Dalton, who is played in the movie by Leonardo DiCaprio, um, and his stuntman body double friend Cliff Booth, who is played in the movie by Brad Pitt, as they navigate the last dying days of the golden age of Hollywood, as Rick struggles to keep himself afloat because his star power has faded since the 1950s, whenever he was the star of a Western television show. And all of that culminates in the movie, at least, with an alternate history version of the Manson family murders, which is not how things went, but definitely how things should have went. But the book doesn't, again, as I said, doesn't quite adhere to that, but it's the same basic thing. So if you've seen the movie, you'll get you know what happens more or less. But it's interesting what Tarantino did to the characters in this book, because the characters do not match up at all with what is portrayed in the movie. Even though basically the same things happen and they do the same things, the way that their characters come across is radically different in this novel than it is in the film. In the film, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, I didn't really like Rick Dalton, even though Leonardo DiCaprio knocked it out of the park playing that role. I didn't really like his character because he was so whiny and kind of petulant, and he was kind of spoiled, and he was just kind of an asshole. But conversely, I really did like Cliff Booth, Brad Pitt's character, and I think a lot of other people agree that he's kind of the hero of the story because he's upstanding, he's stalwart and loyal, and he more or less appears to kind of try to do the right thing. But all of that is flipped in this book. When you read this book, or at least with me, Rick is by far the more likable character than Cliff. Actually, Cliff Booth in this book is not by any means a hero. He is actually pretty much 100% despicable. His character in this book is basically a remorseless psychopath who murders people, a lot of people, like just cold blooded murders people throughout this book and gets away with it. Whereas that's not even touched upon. Well, it is touched upon because there's that scene where you're wondering whether he killed his wife on the boat. That one scene that you're kind of like, did he do it? Well, this book answers that question. Yes, he did it. He murdered his wife and a lot of other people too. And I'm really at a loss as to why Tarantino would do this, because I guess unless he just wanted to shake it up, because Like I said, Rick comes across far more likable and sympathetic in this book than he does in the film, but Cliff's character just got destroyed. He is just, there's nothing redeeming about him in this book, and it really surprised me. But I will give credit for this book not just being a strict rehash of the film. This is honestly far more than a mere movie novelization, actually. It's honestly kind of something unto itself. But um, let's talk about what this book really likes to indulge in, because I said that the movie I thought was so self indulgent because there's just so many shots of driving and the antenna repair scene. And I know that scene was meant to introduce Charles Manson into the storyline just to have him show up, but still, I don't pay good money to go to a theater to watch a guy repair a television antenna, even though it is, a shirtless Brad Pitt. But um, I think the movie was really indulgent. I think this book was really indulgent, but I was able to stomach it better in this book because it actually gave the book a certain degree of substance. If you don't know about Tarantino as a person, in addition to being a director, he is also a major cinephile, as I suppose most movie directors probably are. But Tarantino takes it to a new level. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of film and television history and kind of pop culture at large as well. And he puts that to great use in this book because major, and I mean major, portions of this book are just devoted to the discussion of films. And while that may sound boring, it's actually not, because Tarantino is kind of reflecting on the history of Hollywood, but he's also using that to extrapolate larger observations about the world itself in the time period that this book slash film covers. As an example, and it's kind of odd because it contradicts the tone of the film. The movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is such a glowing homage to Hollywood's golden age. There is such a disdain apparent in that movie for the counterculture and the hippie movement and everything, and the way that that basically ended Hollywood's golden age, and the era that began in the late '60s, early '70s of new Hollywood, where films became radically different in tone and subject matter than they had been since, well, I guess Hollywood began. But the movie, whereas the movie is such a tribute to that, this book is more of a critique of it because um, he Tarantino explains that the movies that were produced, the majority of movies that were produced in the golden age of Hollywood, don't really have that much artistic value. That is, they're made, American films at least. They're made more just for entertainment and not to, be any kind of artistic achievement in and of themselves. And he makes a great point that European and Japanese films and such after World War II became much more about conveying some real emotion and themes and ideas than American movies did after World War II, because America did not have to see the level of violence that the rest of the world, or at least the rest of the Western world and parts of Asia, did during that war. That's not to say, I mean, obviously we had a big hand in World War II, but our homeland was never invaded. And so the majority of our citizens did not have to witness firsthand the violence and brutality of World War II. But for the countries that did, their films became much more reflective of their post-war mindset, and subsequently, as Tarantino puts forth, worth more as works of art than most American films of that time period. And now again, this goes on for a long time. There are scores, if not hundreds, of pages in this book just devoted to the discussion of film. But it gives the book a certain, as I said, substance that I didn't really anticipate it having. This book is, I would hesitate to call this, capital L literature, but it does have something to say. And again, I just wasn't expecting that at all. It uses Tarantino's encyclopedic knowledge of Hollywood and television and film history to kind of comment upon the way the world was through the lens of film, pun intended, lens of film in that time period. And it just was actually it did something for this book, and it did something for me that I really wasn't expecting, and I really do appreciate that. As for the negatives of this uh, book, my biggest critique of this book is the wanton vulgarity with which it is written. Now, of course, Quentin Tarantino is known for being rather coarse. His films are not family films. However, he takes it to a new extreme in this book. It is, without question, the most vulgar and obscene book I have ever read in terms of the language. The only thing that rivals it possibly is like Gravity's Rainbow. It feels odd to be comparing this book to that book, but there you go. It is so needlessly profane. I shit you not. I shit you not. Literally every other word in this book is a curse word. Every other word, and that is not hyperbole. If you don't believe me, just read the book. Every other word in this book is a curse word. Every sentence, every single one. And I just don't think it needed to be that way. Like, I get it, Tarantino, you like, I mean, your book, I mean, your movies are violent and profane and edgy, but there comes a point where you're reaching edge lord status, where you're just trying to make this so, offensive to sensibilities and stuff that it just doesn't need to be that way, or at least it didn't to me. It was kind of off-putting at times, really. And the way that he treats the female characters in this book, and also the subject of sex in this book, is um not the most tactful. I'll say that. It was, again, obscenity is just the name of the game with this book, and that extends into the realm of how he treats the female characters and sexual interactions. It is really, really vile. It really is. I'm not going to describe it because I feel like I need to wash my mouth out with soap after doing that. But it just didn't need to be that way. I don't think it just you didn't have to make it be this needlessly in your face, edgy and profane. I mean, I get it. I'm not a prude. I don't care if you curse or throw in a bunch of sex or anything in a book. I don't care as long as it needs to be there. But this was not that. It went so far beyond anything I've ever read in terms of the vulgarity of it that it really did put me off at certain points. But still, there was a lot to like about this book. The characters actually did kind of come alive, even though the majority of this book is telling and not showing. I think if you tell enough, you can actually, get around the need to show if you just keep keep telling until we get it. And this book kind of did that. Is again, it's not artful in the slightest, but then again, it wasn't ever really designed to be. And in that way, it's kind of untouchable. It's kind of beyond critique in the regards to how it's written because you know you really do know after reading this that this book was never written to be any other way than the way it was. And so if it fails, then it fails intentionally. And is there such a thing as an intentional failure? I'll leave that up to you to decide. But uh, it's artless. It's definitely tactless, but it was meant to be that way. And there is a lot to commend it for. Like I said, the characters actually kind of did come alive a little bit. I've read worse in terms of the characterization. Um, the knowledge on display of film and film history and such was actually kind of interesting, and I actually didn't mind that level of indulgence in this so much as I did in the film version. But I think that the film version did conclude better than this book did. But yeah, this book was again not at all perfect, far from it. But it was so much more than I was anticipating, and I really am glad I read it. And Tarantino has said that he only plans to make one more film. Apparently, when he started out, he was like, "I'm going to make 10 films, and that's it, and then I'm going to switch to being an author and become a man of letters and whatnot." Well, if that is his real intent, I'm kind of down with that. I could definitely, I think, I'm not going to say he's the greatest writer ever, but I think there are worse out there, and I think he does have a certain degree of potential. So, yeah, this book, To Rate Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the novel, I think I would give it a C plus. I think that's what I would give it. I would give it a good C plus. Not great by any means, but far from terrible. And it's, as I said, much more than a mere novelization of a film. It is really and truly something unto itself. So yeah, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. Have you seen and or read Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about the book and or the movie. If you have not seen the movie or read the book, well, I could recommend definitely watching the movie because it's a less of a time investment than the book. But if you're curious, as I was, to see how Tarantino handles himself as an author, you might want to pick this up. I think it is really kind of uh, it'll keep you engaged. I think if nothing else, it'll keep you engaged. I think it. I think it's almost, roughly about as entertaining as the film, and it had something to offer. Really, it did. So I could kind of recommend it especially if you are a fan of the film. But yeah, and as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to like, subscribe, help the channel out a little bit. I would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, peace.